Alright, so this is one that Owen mentioned doing a long time ago, and while I thought it was actually a good idea to pair the two together, I never actually thought it would come to this. Like, actually, because it's like, how do you talk about these extensively? Because I say sometimes that can be a problem with comedies, especially ones that are just so over the top. But after a rewatch of UHF, it was kind of like, yeah, we could probably say a few things about this. Me and you learned about UHF the same way, right? Through our friend Charlie, who had like he had like recorded it off of TV on a VHS and brought it over, and that's how we saw it. And I remember thinking it was like, because I don't know that I had been introduced to like the Naked Gun yet. And it may have possibly been pre-Scary Movie, or right around the time of Scary Movie. So the idea of a parody like this was something that I remember at the time being really foreign to me, hence really interesting. That you could take a movie like I hadn't seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I knew that it was like, I knew what it was enough that to recognize the opening of this scene and what they were doing exactly. Where they were doing the same thing, but not doing the same thing, and turning it into this over-the-top comedy. Which to me was a brand new concept when I saw this movie. And I think that actually fits really well with Weird Al's style, because usually when somebody starts from another medium and then goes into movies, they're kind of maybe getting in over their head. But he's stuck with the material that he knows, which is parody, which was just kind of the perfect transition. On top of the fact that he himself had that cameo in The Naked Gun and did the whole Spy Hard opening number and all that. I think Spy Hard was after this, though, but still. In that, were you introduced to... you knew Weird Al before you saw this, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Where exactly did you first hear about him? Or how?
It was Charlie or Tony playing his CD. It was around when Running with Scissors first came out.
Yeah, and much like some of the stuff in UHF, it was like, when we heard his songs, we became familiar with those before the real songs they were parodying, or the movies they were parodying. Like we were talking about, when we actually talked about the Indiana Jones series, both me and you were talking about how we both saw this before Raiders, and so it's really hard to watch Raiders without thinking of the dude getting hit by the train, or it being an Oscar instead, and all that. So even the dumbest of comedy can have that kind of impact, especially if the timing is right. And it's just kind of, this particular movie is just kind of the perfect companion piece to his music, more or less. It's just doing it with movies. And it also feels like kind of an ode to TV, also, particularly when he gets to do the Beverly Hillbillies number a while back. Always kind of stuck out to me. It's like, why the hell is this here? It seems so random and out of place. Not that everything else in the movie is isn't that random or out of place, but it also kind of feels like with the inclusion of that, it almost feels like an ode to TV itself and classic TV itself, while also doing the parody thing also. Because all of his parodies are they're known for being really good natured. I think that's why most people love for that to happen. Like when he did the Smells Like Teen Spirit parody, wasn't it like Kurt Cobain said that he really felt like he'd made it because Weird Al had parodied him? So yeah, so what are your kind of impressions on the movie itself?
It's a very odd movie.
Yeah.
It's very weird. But I agree with you. It kind of works best as a parody, like his music did. It's a good extension of his music.
Yeah.
It actually surprises me that he didn't really venture back into it to this scale.
Yeah.
Because I would love for him to make another UHF style movie satirizing the internet. I think he could make that work really well.
Yeah. Like
a Weird Al version of Ralph Breaks the Internet or something. I think it'd be interesting to see, and it's stupid funny. It's really funny. Michael Richards is great in it. All of the TV shows that he parodies are great. He himself is great in it. I always use the line whenever I'm doing anything. I'll make dinner for Susan and I'll hand it to her and I'll go, "Hope you enjoy it."
I love the whole build up to that.
Yeah.
I also love that it's like what's really interesting about the "Hope you enjoy it" scene when he's introducing Uncle Nutsy's clubhouse for the second time after everything's gone to shit. But the thing about it is, you would think this is the payoff to, oh, the show was once great and now he's down. But the show was always terrible because the first Uncle Nutsy scene is just as much of a... because he comes out and he's happy and he's kind of trying to do like the Paul Rubens thing. And then probably one of my favorite parts of the movie is Bobo the Clown. Because Bob is the straight man through the whole movie. And then he has this one scene, though, where he's Bobo the Clown. And he comes out and he does the dance and he's got the horn and he's so happy. And every time you see it, it gets funnier because you know just how south it goes for him in this thing after he comes out. Like, once he takes the frying pan to the face, it's, like, over for him. Like, the horn becomes really pathetic the second time he does it. But then there's the whole thing where that's when the Michael Richards story kind of takes off, the Stanley Spadowski story.
Which is funny because I feel like Stanley Spadowski's storyline is another one that could work really well in a modern take with the internet. Because Stanley would just be like that random YouTuber.
He'd be a viral outbreak.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And the thing about that also is, what I really loved about what Richards does here is that you get so... Well, this is probably what, around the premiere of Seinfeld, 89.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that area. This is 89, right? Yeah. And the thing about it is, Michael Richards has gotten crap before where they say, like, Kramer is all he ever did. But it's like, Kramer is incompetent in a certain way, but when you see his performances like Stanley, suddenly Kramer seems like a genius. And it's like, seems so competent. And the way he plays this character, like, who's an absolute complete idiot, and could have really been annoying with any other actor, like, that didn't quite understand where the character's coming from. Because the great thing that he does here, and I think is what helps make Stanley remain so likable when he could be annoying, and his stupidity could seem really over the top, is that, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, I used to actually get really, like... It would genuinely make me sad, the scene where he gets his mop taken away after he gets fired. And, like, when he says, like, it's just not fair, he, like, becomes really genuine, even despite the fact that the character is such an over-the-top in his idiocy. And
he's a buffoon.
Yeah. But, like, when he's actually on his show, it's totally even though the movie is a parody of the whole TV thing, and, like, kind of this exaggerated version of it, still, Stanley Spadowski's Clubhouse looks like a show that would actually exist, that would actually be popular, in the time that it was, like, in the late 80s. It really seems like it would be.
You get to drink from the fire hose.
Yeah. Once again, obviously exaggerated. But in a sense, like, the sense that the show has in general feels like... and what was it he did to drink from the fire hose? He found the marble in the oatmeal. whatever the hell that is. And just that nature of how, like, every new thing we saw on there was, like, a different thing. And that's
the Wheel of Fish. You had the guy with the badgers. I can't think of the name of it.
Like Raoul's Animal Kingdom or something.
Yeah.
And that's the great thing about him is... Obviously, there's going to be... When movies like this are constantly throwing stuff at you, there is going to be stuff that doesn't land. Like, at the beginning, I always felt like, much like Stanley, it's kind of a miracle that George ends up likable, too. Because it does seem like at the start he might be annoying. Like, when he's, like, telling, you know, his girlfriend that he got fired, or there's another scene where he resorts to, like, screaming and, like, slamming his head off the wall. It's like, if that had been his whole character, I don't think this movie would be durable. But it's just every now and then in those little bursts, like the "Hope you enjoy it" is a perfect outburst moment. But the thing about that is that yeah, he does actually become, like, a character that we want to see succeed, and that's also greatly helped by Kevin McCarthy as the villain, who seems like a really out there choice also, who was mainly known for the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers and stuff like that, and Piranha, and then he came through and just really committed to playing this villain as over-the-top evil.
And it works. He really makes it work.
He has a great over-the-top evil laugh, too.
Anthony Geary's a lot of fun and
Yeah,
his weirdness.
He's another one that's totally random too. I think I remember hearing Weird Al saying that obviously at the time Anthony Geary was mainly known for General Hospital, who he was a main character until like what 2017. He finally retired. It was a long ass time, and it was actually they didn't approach him. He came in. And they were like, what the hell? But the thing is if you look at his other movies, it's like between General Hospital, Anthony Geary was mostly just in like these small comedies. Like there's a movie, I want to say it's You Can't Hurry Love, I think, that he was in, where he had a really funny part also. And yeah, that he was able to just come in and play this weird character that really plays on just the... I mean, I hate to say this, I hate to put it this way because it's very easy to take on a negative connotation, especially now, especially since it's been way overused, but just the randomness of the movie in general, where Philo's character ends up, and what exactly his purpose was, and the fact that they can just put shit like that in the movie, and it's just this one-off joke. Because there are jokes in here where, like another thing that I feel like sometimes works and sometimes doesn't in the movie, this brings us back to Raoul, I got sidetracked, was every now and then there's like a really random movie reference. And like sometimes they really work, but sometimes it just kind of feels like just that, like just a reference. Like the mashed potatoes scene. When he says this means something, the Close Encounters scene. It's like the only reason that's there is because it's a Close Encounters reference. But then you have the Badger scene, which is obviously a reference to Treasure of the Sierra Madre. And the thing about this is we've already had Raoul's big scene when he introduces the animals. He like makes the turtle wave. He shakes the ant form and says, "They're really mad now." I think my favorite is when he's throwing the cats out the window and it's like, "Oh man," every time. And that scene happens. It's the second scene he's in when he does the Badgers thing. And it's like, okay, so they make the Treasure of the Sierra Madre reference. And like the Close Encounters thing, it's really nothing more than just a reference. But the fact that it feels like the only reason they created the Raoul character was to get to that joke. That's what makes it funny. We had that whole first scene with him throwing the cats out the window, shaking the ant form, just so we could get to the Badgers joke later. That's what makes it funny. Even if it's just a reference, you gotta have that build up to it, and then that's what the payoff is. And then all the people that obviously come in here. Something you mentioned about Anthony Geary, I forgot about, that I really love. Because obviously there's the over-the-top stuff, like he ends up being an alien that just flies off. But I really love his opening scene, when it's like... it's another thing where it's like it's intentionally being like way over the top, and probably a little too silly. But he adds this perfect layer to it, because he's like, you know, "Hey, what are you working on there?" And he's like, "Oh, whatever it was he was doing with those things." And so... George does the whole thing where it's like his hair goes up and he does this really over-the-top, you know, comedic bit where he's like mugging. And then it just results in Philo taking the wig going, "Yeah, it works." And then that's the end of the joke. It's like the payoff of the joke isn't the big part and isn't the mugging. It's just the very downplayed, "Yep, it works." And that's all they need. And then obviously there's, you know, the random cameos like Emo Phillips. Is a really great scene. The dude that cuts his finger off. Is my face red? And also another thing these movies do that's really great, because it also kind of reminds you of movies like Amazon Women on the Moon, doesn't it? Just like those sketch movies. And just those little moments, like the stuff that has nothing to do with anything, we've only seen it once and we never see it again. When like the homeless guy's outside with the blind guy, and the blind guy's working the Rubik's Cube, and it's like, "Is this it?" He's like, "No." And they just do that back and forth. "Is this it?" And he just moves it like once. We never see that guy again. At least I don't remember we do. What do you think of it on, like, as far as actually having a story? Like, of his uncle being in debt and him having to basically get the station from him, but then they've got Kevin McCarthy coming after it. It's actually kind of a decent story for the kind of movie.
For what it is, yeah.
Because
it's very easy to just have something flimsy in place, like, oh, he just runs his studio and he has to come up with the next zany show.
Yeah. And the stuff almost feels like they just kind of work in the skits. Like stuff like Gandhi 2. And Gandhi 2 is one of those things where, once again, sometimes it just takes one moment. Because you've got... The concept of Gandhi 2 is funny. because he's kicking ass and he's firing guns now, and it's like, oh, Gandhi, by the way, is played by the director of the movie. They co-wrote the script with Weird Al, and it's like, yeah, Gandhi too. That's a funny joke, but then all it takes is one thing. When he pulls up in the car, I'm gone. It's the funniest shit in the fucking world to me when he pulls up in the car. Like, I completely lose my fucking mind when Gandhi pulls up in the car. So, is there any particular places where you feel like it kind of fails at all? Or maybe it's not quite as good or funny as some of its other parts?
Not really. I think it's just kind of what you said, it's throwing so many jokes at you that some land and some don't. I mean, in a case like that, you got to try everything. It's fortunate that it's a movie where I think there's more landings than misses. And there's a lot of movies that it doesn't happen that way. A lot of movies will throw things at you, and most of it doesn't stick.
Yeah, and it's it's one of those movies where, like I've been saying, it can either get really big, or it can just be like one throwaway line. Like, for some reason, I've always liked the way Michael Richards, after he gets fired, I don't know if it's the choice of words or what it is, but just the way he says, "They threw me out like a bag of moldy tangerines."
It's a movie that holds up on rewatch.
Yeah.
But it's still funny.
But once again, though, the reason I asked you if you had any criticisms was it's also one of those movies where it's like, it's just so incredibly dumb at the same time. If somebody said that they didn't think it was funny or they didn't, care for it,
you would understand.
Yeah, totally. It's like, if you think this is the dumbest movie you've ever seen, I'm probably not going to argue with you.
We had this conversation earlier today. Would you file UHF under a cult movie in that regard? Where there's a lot of us that the comedy's going to hit and it's going to be funny, and there's going to be a lot of people that watch it and they're like, I don't get it.
Yeah, because he's remained relevant for so long. Weird Al has.
He's been relevant for like 30 years.
Yeah, like it's actually to the point now to where it's totally believable that he has fans of his music these days that may not even know this movie exists.
Mm-hmm.
Especially since he's still hitting like the popular songs too.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the things that provoked this whole video was Owen just saw him live like last week or a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And said that all you hear about is how great of a show he can put on. Mm-hmm. Like, I've heard nothing other than he puts on an amazing show. And
I would love to see it.
No one said it about lives up to that. Apparently he did everything from the classics to I had no idea he actually performed this song live. Apparently he did Weasel Stomping Day from Robot Chicken.
What?
Yeah, he actually performed it.
What? That doesn't surprise me though. At the same time, like I feel like Weird Al is somebody that would be a fan of Robot Chicken, because Robot Chicken in a way is a lot like UHF.
Yeah.
It just throws a bunch of stuff at you, and some sticks and some doesn't. I've seen plenty of jokes that don't land at all on Robot Chicken, but yet every once in a while you have a Pluto Nash Remembrance Day sketch that's really funny.
Yeah, and then there is, I love the ending also, where it's almost like it doesn't just take parody in the way of, here's the movie or TV show you recognize and we're going to blow it up and do this big thing with it, like Rambo, for instance, but stuff like tropes. Like, I love and I'm not sure if this is intentionally, like, doing a big parody of a trope or if it's just the way the movie is, but I like to take it as it's a parody. The fact that Kevin McCarthy gets a comeuppance as the villain, but the comeuppances just never... It's like a never-ending stream of comeuppances over and over and over again as the movie ends. Like, just when you think the movie's ending, another bad thing happens to him. Because, like, it starts off with... He's able to buy the station... Get the station signed over to him before his uncle signs it over to Fletcher. Then, once that fails, the FCC just shuts down his station entirely. Then it turns out that he's the reason they were able to afford it, because he gave the homeless guy that penny just as a throwaway, just to say fuck you, and the penny ended up being worth like $2,000 that he gave to them. And then there's the whole thing with his kid. His kid actually gets some funny lines too. And that's one of those cases where you think he'd just be the annoying side villain. But I think one of my favorite jokes in the movie, I'll tell you what my favorite joke of the movie is in a second. But one of my favorite jokes in the movie is just, once again, one of those throwaway lines when he's saying, you know, what would my father be saying if he were alive today? And his kid goes, help me, I gotta get out of this box, help me. But no, do you have any idea what my favorite joke in the movie is?
Gandhi pulling up in the car.
Close. There is one thing else that is funnier even than that. Okay. And it is so simple. In a movie this over the top, it is so simple.
Okay.
It's when that dude comes in with the big cowboy hat with like the raccoon tail on it and the mustache. And he comes in and he gives like a whole... They just have this whole scene of conversation. And then Fletcher gets pissed off again and the guy kind of gets sad and starts to leave. And of course he's wearing this big ridiculous hat. And Fletcher's like, and take that ridiculous thing off. And the guy's like, and takes his mustache off. That is the best fucking joke in the movie. Do you have a favorite joke in the movie?
That's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good one.
I did always, as a kid, I always loved the Rambo bit. I think it's because it's so damn over the top. What's great is it's so over the top, but if you've seen Rambo 2, it's not that over the top. It's kind of exactly like that. Where he even started doing the bodies exploding in the fourth Rambo movie.
God.
And then even, this got to it, because Hot Shots 2 did a huge Rambo segment that's a lot like the one in this one, and I want to say this came first. If it wasn't first, it was like the same year or the year after.
What year is this?
This is 89. I'm going to say Hot Shots was like 89 or 90. Hot Shots 2 was.
I think so.
Right, so they would have been really close together, and the parodies are so similar, up to and including rescuing somebody, where he's got to rescue Michael Richards, and Charlie Sheen was rescuing Rowan Atkinson.
Yeah.
So yeah. Like I said, there's really not a whole lot to say about it, except that either you think it's hilarious, or you think it's one of the dumbest things ever.
It's definitely an hour and a half of strangeness.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think I ever actually read his review, but I heard that Ebert ripped it apart. And it's like, that's sad, but I get it. I totally get it. Like, I'm wondering, like, if this movie wasn't in our lives for as long as it has been, like, if I saw it today, if I would think if it's as funny as I do now. Some stuff would probably always work, like Gandhi in the car and the mustache, but, like, the parodies themselves maybe are a product of their time. So, like, back when, the Naked Gun, like, really took off in that area.
That's why I'd love to see it. That's why I'd love to see it updated, because I feel like if Weird Al did another one around this time frame, it would really stick out, because parody isn't nearly what it was back then.
Freeberg and Seltzer killed it.
Yeah.
Like, they completely killed it dead.
Yeah, and who better to bring it back than pretty much the father of parody?
Yeah, because it was...
Well, not the father of parody, but the father of musical parody.
Yeah. Because I would say we started with, what, Airplane? More or less. And then it kind of went on.
Which Airplane's great.
And then around the time, interestingly enough, Weird Al comes back. I think around the time Spy Hard happened is probably when it was kind of dying off. And then the Wayans brothers brought it back with Scary Movie, and then Freeberg and Seltzer killed it again. So it's like, if it comes back...
And then Movie 43 walked up and shot the corpse.
Oh, God. So, yeah, but that's not to say that it can't come back, but it definitely takes something. You can't do what Freeberg and Seltzer did and just go out and say, hey, these are the movies you know, and hey, these are those references. Even though, like I said, there are scenes like that in this, like the Close Encounters mashed potatoes thing. But once again, then you've also got the Raoul thing, where it's like, if you build it up enough, and it's like you go out of your way as far as you can to make that joke, we will respect you. So, give us a dude shaking an ant farm and throwing cats out of a window if you want to make a Treasure Serum Andre reference at the end of it. Go right ahead. So does that pretty much sum up UHF?
Yeah, it's another one of those two that surprises me. Kind of like Loaded Weapon. It's one of those movies that never had a follow-up.
Yeah, Loaded Weapon's good too.
And what's funny, I guess it's the joke that it's called Part 1 and there's not a follow-up.
Yeah, same with History of the World.
Yeah.
Alright, yeah, Mel Brooks. totally forgot to mention, Mel Brooks is pre-Airplane. Shit.
Yeah.
Fuck that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles and all that. So yeah, it's kind of hard to tell who the father parody is. It might be Mel Brooks. Then again, there might be something else I'm not thinking of either. But yeah, those are out there, and they could return, but they're gonna really need to. They have a very uphill battle if they're gonna come back in a positive way. So we'll see what happens.
I mean, if anybody could do it, I mean, it would be the Mel Brookses, the Zuckers, and the Weird Owls of the world.
Yeah. Alright, so you haven't seen Stay Tuned.
No.
So should I tell you about Stay Tuned real quick?
I'm just reading the names of the chapters here, and some of them crack me up.
Well, I was telling you earlier, obviously Stay Tuned, I don't know how many people are familiar with Stay Tuned. I remember just catching it on a movie channel once a while back, interestingly enough. And yeah, it's from Peter Hyams, who would go on to direct stuff like End of Days. Not only did he direct it, he's the cinematographer as well. So he really put a lot into this. But yeah, it's this comedy from 1992, I believe. So right around the time Wayne's World came out, which will come into play here. So John Ritter is one of those characters that just sits around and doesn't do anything but basically obsesses over his TV. His old TV shows, sports, whatever, just anything TV related. Errol Flynn movies, anything like that. He's even obsessed with like fencing because he's so into Errol Flynn movies. And eventually, there's actually a prologue to the movie where a very mysterious Jeffrey Jones comes to the door, and he's like, hey, you people are watching TV, are you? And then they, like, disappear. And we're like, what the hell is that? So he shows up again for John Ritter, and it turns out that Jeffrey Jones is apparently from hell, and I don't know if he's the devil, but he's certainly something of the kind. And Eugene Levy kind of explains it. But they introduce us to this very abruptly, because he's like basically an evil version of Don Knotts in Pleasantville. So he sends John Ritter and his wife Pam Dauber, who was Mindy and Morgan Mindy, I believe, interestingly enough, into the TV where they will where every show now is on this channel called, or on this whatever you want to call it, Hell Vision is what he calls it, I believe. Where not only is it every TV show that he knows and loves, but it's an evil, like, hell-induced version of it. So you've got stuff like Dwayne's Underworld, where you see it's Wayne and Garth, only they're demons. And they've got, like, a whole, crowd of demons, like a live studio audience of demons. The first one we see is Three Men and Rosemary's Baby. And the movie is just full of those. Like, that's the best part of the movie, is seeing the parodies that they do. There's one where instead of, like, like Candid Camera, it's sadistic hidden videos, where, like, a cop goes to a woman's door and says, like, your family's been killed in an accident. And then they realize it's, like, a hidden... Like, I think we're supposed to assume it's really happened to her, but there's also a hidden camera to catch it. And when she realizes that she's on TV, that's all she cares about. It doesn't matter that her family's dead. My favorite, My Three Sons of Bitches. There's all these... There's Meet the Mansons, which is like a 1950s-style sitcom, and the main character is a kid named Chuck. Charles Manson. And he and Pam Dauber are stuck in those shows, and they have to survive in those shows for 24 hours, because that's where the movie gets kind of dark. You can be killed inside the shows. You have to survive inside the shows. And I actually love... The movie is kind of so off the radar and, like, PG... but it has, like, a real, like, mean streak in it. Like, it's really kind of sick and twisted in its heart. There's the moment where we have, like, the older couple, and they get stuck in a Godzilla movie, and the wife actually gets stepped on by Godzilla and killed. And the jaded husband goes into a 1940s gangster movie and becomes, like, a head gangster, like, just out of his jadedness. And so they basically have to fight their way through this. And it's like a really interesting concept. They do end up in some cases like, they end up in like a wrestling ring, and their opponents like roar, and it's like clearly the audio of the MGM Lion.
Is that the No Holds Barred chapter here?
That's very likely. And then there's, but it does get interesting in the different directions that it goes in. At one point, they're cartoon mice for a little while.
There's a picture of that in here.
Yeah, and it's actually, there's actually a lot of references in it to other companies. Like I was talking about the MGM Lion Roar. There's also a moment where the mice are hiding, and there's like, you can see like the shapes of Mickey's as like an obvious reference. It's like Disney today would kill them for that. They'd have them assassinated for making that reference. And then they actually use like the cliches of stuff like that to get out of stuff. Like,
Is that why we lost John Ritter so soon?
Oh God. So the thing is don't tell me you're gonna say Jeffrey Jones was framed too.
No.
So the thing is he uses the cliches from those things to get out of it. Like he's being chased by a robot cat when he's a mouse.
Is that cartoon mice versus RoboCat?
That could be. So how does he get out of the situation?
He paints a tunnel.
Close. He calls Acme. And gets a robot dog delivered to him.
Ah.
So it's like that kind of stuff is clever, where they actually use that stuff that we know about it. And yes, while Mork and Mindy never comes into play, yes, there is a scene where he ends up on the set of Three's Company. And he just looks into the camera and screams like he's in hell. But then as it goes on, it does like, it starts to spend a little too much time on stuff. Like there's a point in time where they get stuck in France and he's like a marquis and he has to dress in women's clothing to disguise himself. And that's like one joke for like 10 or 15 minutes. And for a movie that's an hour and a half, that's kind of a long time and kind of feels dragged out. And you can tell that they're kind of really starting to go towards the silly and sacrificing the clever to do that. So there's stuff like that. And then there's like, it starts to get uneven. Like, once one of his kids figures it out, and then there's a whole side plot where he has to convince his sister that the parents are inside the TV. And then once they both figure it out, they have to come up with this plan to try to get them out. But we already know that they're on the verge of getting out, so it's like, we know the movie's going to go on because of just the way it's structured. Where it's like, they're almost out because they just have to go over, they just have to get to the deadline of if they're in there for 24 hours, they're free to go. And they're like 2 minutes away, and they're like, oh, we'll just wait it out now. And it's at this point in the movie that the kids are like, oh, we've got to get them out of there, and they get this whole elaborate plan. And it's like, we only need one of those, otherwise. And then eventually it just goes away. I mean, I guess you can commend it, because, like, how else do you do this but let it go completely off the rails by the end? But, like, they start in a Western, and then there's a very prolonged scene where they end up in, remember I said 1992, right? A very prolonged climax of he and Jeffrey Jones ending up in a Salt and Pepper music video, which is pictured right there. That scene goes on for fucking ever. It's like by then you're like, all right, yeah, I think you've run your creativity dry and we can wrap this up now. But it was really fun while it lasted. And like I said, mainly because of its dark sense of humor. There's one where it's like sometimes they show you the show and the punchline is what the show is, like what it's parodying exactly. So it's two old guys and one of them is like, oh man, I don't really feel good, very good here. And then he like loses consciousness. And then the guy next to him is like, I don't feel very good here. And then he loses consciousness. Different strokes.
Oh, okay.
It's like when the movie's doing stuff like that, it's pure gold. Like I said, because it's so fucking dark and like unapologetic in its humor. And then it's, yeah, like I said, a lot of the time it does kind of lose its way, and it ends up being like, they even go out in the references too. What's not pictured here is when he's in Dwayne's Underworld, that shirt actually has Sphincter Boy written on it. So they definitely know their references, but yeah, it does eventually lose its way, and it's silly from the get-go. Like the first time we really learn it's from hell is Jeffrey Jones is like driving down the road in his van, and he's like, you know, doing an evil Jeffrey Jones laugh, and then like just out of nowhere, because we don't know this is what he is yet, the earth just kind of opens up and his van just drives into hell. It's this really weird shot. It's like, if you don't know the concept, you're like, what the fuck just happened? But yeah, so it has a lot of promise, and it is worth revisiting because of that stuff. Some of the other ones here are like Northern Overexposure, because of the Northern Exposure show that John Corbett was on. That's just them trapped in the middle of the, you know, wintry wilderness with Eugene Levy. Eugene Levy loses a couple of body parts. You got Driving Over Miss Daisy. There's a whole thing where the end credits is just a bunch of titles.
Mm.
So some really simple and lazy, but some are genuinely dark and funny. So, but yeah, I do think UHF is much more is able to keep itself afloat much longer. Stay Tuned does lose its way, but it does have those moments where, like, Stay Tuned is what you want over UHF if you're looking for something a bit, like, darker humor. Like, something that'll make you feel really guilty for laughing at it. Stay Tuned is filled with that. So it's definitely worth, looking into for that. But I would still say that, once again, really kind of, I wouldn't say an acquired taste, but it depends on your taste in regards to how you take UHF, but I think both of us take UHF in a really positive direction, even though we can't acknowledge it's not always going to land when you're throwing that many jokes, but there's still definitely something worthwhile in there. So I think that's about it for these. So the next time we're going to be doing a movie that's a really big deal, a movie that's sort of really defined in its cult status, and not just the way you casually throw around the word cult movie anymore. This is like one of the cult movies, to the point that I was never sure if we were going to do a video on it because I wasn't sure what to do it with and what we could say that hasn't been said already, but I think we'll get it figured out. So, and then that'll be the next one after this. So anything else to add about this? Alright, then I think that's it for these.